Imagine Florence, not the city of art and marble, but the city of secrets. The torchlight flickers, casting long shadows down a perfumed hallway, an echo of footsteps fading into a terrifying silence. The Medici family, the architects of this golden age, held a dark paradox at their core. The very laws they wrote to maintain order were the chains they used to indulge their most forbidden desires. A whisper in a quiet chamber, a ledger entry hidden in plain sight, a sealed document handed off in the dark. In this world of beauty and brutality, a dangerous game of power and submission was played. The whispers in Florence are not just about marble and gold. They are about powerful men who demand more than just art. They are about the secrets written in a private ledger, a document so chilling it could turn a man's soul to ice. In this tale, a young artist discovers the true price of favor from the city's most powerful man. The oak door of the Palazzo Medici was as heavy as a coffin lid. A velvet envelope, sealed with the family's crest, lay on the small table. A servant, his face blank, had delivered it an hour earlier. It was a summons for Pietro, a sculptor whose talent was only just beginning to blossom. He was a beautiful boy, all soft lines and hopeful eyes. The note was brief, by instruction of Lorenzo. The words were a command, not an invitation. A low, rhythmic echo of footsteps sounded from an unseen hallway, growing louder, then stopping. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and danger. The latch on the door clicked. He knew what that meant. He was to enter alone, unannounced. A cold knot formed in his stomach. The instructions were clear: a private audience. Pietro's breath hitched. He had heard the rumors, of course, the quiet stories about the patron who gave so much, but demanded something far more. The door to a chamber was now open, a sliver of candlelight visible through the crack. His future was about to be decided. He stepped into a room filled with deep shadows. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive perfume. In the corner, a single torch burned, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A man sat at a large desk, his face hidden by the light, a single book open before him. It was Lorenzo de' Medici himself. Another man, a pale clerk, sat to the side, a quill poised over a second, smaller book. "Come closer, Pietro." Lorenzo's voice was a low rumble. "We have a ledger to complete." The clerk dipped his quill. "Favor recorded." The words were spoken in a detached voice. The ledger was not of gold, but of names. Pietro watched as the clerk made an entry. Pietro, sculptor, June 1461. The clerk then made a mark in a column. An ominous question whispered through the quiet air. What else did that ledger record? The clerk turned a page. The names of other artists were listed, each with a date, each with a checkbox. Some had multiple marks. A chill ran down Pietro's spine. A subtle sound, the thud of a stamp, punctuated the silence. A favor was recorded. A debt was owed. This was their system. The torchlight flickered, and for a moment, the names on the page seemed to squirm. Lorenzo gestured to the clerk, who shut the ledger with a soft thud. He then picked up a small sealed packet from the desk. It felt heavy in his hands. "This is the price of your progress, Pietro." Lorenzo's voice was smooth, like silk, but it held the weight of a stone. Pietro took the packet. He felt his hands begin to tremble. This was not a contract. It was something else. Inside, a single page was folded neatly, with two other small items. A single pressed lily, matching the scent in the hallway, and a small gold ring. The note contained a list of instructions, detailing the psychological rituals and positions of humiliation that the boy was compelled to perform. A phrase stood out, chilling him to the core. "You will not resist. You will not refuse." The words were a killer line, an admission of complete power and control.
A cold sweat broke out on his brow. The whispers of the city were not rumors at all. They were a truth written in a secret ledger. Pietro knew he was trapped. He was no longer an artist. He was an entry in a book. The psychological pain of that realization was a fate far worse than death. The following day, Pietro was celebrated in Florence. His newest sculpture was praised as a masterwork, a sign of Lorenzo's great patronage. The public saw only the gold and the fame. They saw the artist who had succeeded, who had received the ultimate favor from the great Medici. But behind the doors of the palazzo, the true transaction was known. The price of that success was a part of his soul, a part of his will, a silent and humiliating submission recorded in the cold, unfeeling entries of a ledger. The story of Pietro's rise was in truth a record of his fall, a tale of a man who lost himself for the sake of his art. His silence was a testament to the brutal paradox of power. This was a form of ritualized humiliation that was completely commonplace. What else did the ledgers of Florence hold? The ledger of the patron, a silent record of power and a young man's submission, revealing the shocking price of fame in a beautiful city. The echoes of his humiliation still ring in the palaces. Next, a story of a sealed summons that reveals an even darker secret. In Florence, a seal is not just wax, it is a chain. A powerful man, cloaked in piety and authority, used it to bind a young woman to a horrifying secret. His lust for power was a disease, and his ambition was a cruel, ritualized performance. This is the story of a girl who dared to defy a man of God.
The heavy velvet of the sealed summons felt like a threat. It came for Isabella, a woman from a lesser noble house, one that owed its very survival to the grace of the Medici. Cardinal Giovanni, a man as close to the Pope as he was to Lorenzo de' Medici, demanded her presence. The request was cryptic, sent with a silent, robed page who left no trace but the lingering scent of myrrh. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. She had no reason to be summoned by such a powerful man. Her family pleaded with her to go, reminding her that their name and fortune rested on obedience. They didn't see the terror in her eyes. She was a beautiful rebel, but what could a beautiful rebel do against the power of the Church and the Medici? The summons was not to his public chambers. It directed her to a private, forgotten annex, where the air was cold and still. A single torch burned at the end of a long, dark hallway. The sound of her footsteps echoed on the stone floor, a lonely sound that died in the oppressive silence. A single, heavy oak door awaited her. The scent of myrrh grew stronger. The door was unlocked, but the sound of the latch clicking shut behind her was a sound of finality. She was alone, trapped. What awaited her in the chamber was a horror that would stain her soul forever. The room was lit by a dozen torches, their flames casting a grotesque, dancing light on the tapestries. The cardinal stood in the center, his face a cold, unfeeling mask. By his side, a scribe, with a quill and a parchment scroll. A table was set with a simple chalice and a dagger, objects of ritual. The cardinal's voice was a low, chilling command. "We will now begin the procedure." The scribe, his voice a drone, began to read aloud. "By instruction of His Eminence Cardinal Giovanni, and for the purity of the Medici's bloodline." The words turned her blood to ice. The procedure was a series of ritualistic humiliations designed to break her will and secure her obedience for a marriage of political convenience. A shock stat echoed in her mind. 400 years later, a similar ritual would be exposed in a cult. The cardinal used a series of explicit verbal commands, telling her to engage in intimate, ritualistic acts of submission, her body to be an instrument of his power. His orders were read aloud with a chilling detachment. He was not a man of God. He was a man of cold, calculated cruelty.
Her hands began to shake as the procedure went on. The torchlight stung her eyes, and the smoke filled her lungs. She looked at the scribe, whose face remained a mask, but his hands, she noticed, were trembling. The data was all here, being meticulously recorded on the scroll. What could a single scroll reveal about a powerful man's soul? The ritual continued for what felt like an eternity. The cardinal's voice was a relentless, low murmur, compelling her to continue, to give in, to submit to his power. But as the ceremony drew to a close, a subtle moment broke the spell. As the scribe rolled up the scroll, his trembling hand deliberately dropped a second smaller document. It was a single page, a ledger of favors and debasement, detailing similar rituals with other young women, all for the cardinal's political gain. It was a killer line that exposed him. It was a secret history written in ink. The scribe's gaze met Isabella's for a split second, a silent admission of his terror and a plea for her to take it. This was the price of his progress, a man trapped by a man he served. He had been a witness to the horrors in that room, and he was now a silent accomplice in its exposure. Isabella picked up the small document, concealing it in the folds of her dress. The stakes had flipped. She was no longer a victim. She was an accuser, armed with irrefutable proof. Her mind raced with a terrifying new resolve. She knew what she had to do. But the real challenge was just beginning, for a lie could travel faster than the truth in Florence.
Isabella fled the chamber, the heavy door clicking shut behind her with a sound that seemed to mock her freedom. She found an audience with a prominent chronicler, a man known for his unflinching honesty. She presented the document, the chilling ledger of the cardinal's perversions. At first, he scoffed at the rumor. A simple question cut through the doubt. How could a lesser woman dare to accuse a man of such power? The public reaction was brutal. At first, they believed the cardinal, who claimed she was a liar driven by jealousy. But the scribe, a beautiful rebel in his own right, fled Florence, and his testimony, sent in a sealed letter, confirmed the ledger's authenticity. The public reversal was swift and absolute. The cardinal was exposed. The gallery gasped. His power and influence, built on a foundation of lies and ritualized abuse, crumbled. The lesson was brutal but clear. In Florence, a man's reputation was built on his power to control, not on his virtue. The cardinal's fall was a reminder that some men will stop at nothing to gain what they want, and their secrets can be even more monstrous than their ambition. The city of light was built on shadows, and every beautiful piece of art had its dark price. What secrets did the next set of sealed records hold? What is more dangerous than a man with power, a man with forbidden knowledge? In Florence's quiet libraries, a scholar and his protege sought secrets hidden in ancient texts, unaware that the real horror was not in the words, but in the price of their discovery. This is a story of obsession, manipulation, and a terrifying truth. The private library of Professor Alvise was a tomb of forgotten knowledge. The scent of old paper and dust hung in the still air. Alvise, an aging scholar with a Medici pension, was a man of cold, unfeeling intellect. His protege, Marco, was a young, brilliant mind, obsessed with an ancient text that promised power and enlightenment. It was a book kept under lock and key in the Laurentian library, a project sanctioned by Lorenzo himself. The problem was not the translation, it was the physical component required to unlock its secrets. A single ominous question echoed in the quiet air. How far would a man go for the knowledge he craved? Marco was compelled by his obsession, driven to fulfill the ritualistic instructions, all under the guise of intellectual pursuit. The door to their private study was always locked, the key kept by Alvise. The silence inside was absolute, a heavy weight that pressed down on the two men. It was the silence of a secret, of an experiment, a horrifying procedure carried out far from the city's prying eyes. The only sounds in the room were the scratching of quills and the tick of a large clock on the wall. Outside, the sounds of Florence were muffled, as if a great shroud had been cast over the palace. The closed-door acoustics of the room were a key component of the ritual, creating a sense of isolation and control. Alvise sat at his desk, a private ledger open before him. It was a terrifying document. For each session, he would record Marco's physical reactions and psychological state in chilling, detached prose. A name, a date, and a checkbox. The ritual was not about words, but about the methodical psychological breaking of a man's spirit. The data, meticulously collected, was a record of Marco's gradual decline. The chilling entries read like a butcher's log. Subject presented with a new humiliation, resisted for 12 minutes, compliance recorded. A pattern interrupt. This was no academic pursuit. It was a cold-blooded study of dominance and submission. The ledger was a horrifying object, a secret testament to a man who had turned his intellect to perversion. What was the true purpose of the ritual?
One evening, Alvis handed Marco a sealed packet with instructions for the next stage of the ritual. It was a final test of his obedience. But as Marco took the packet, a small, loose page fell from the ancient book. It was a memo, written in a clear, modern hand. It detailed the creation of the ancient text, revealing it to be a clever forgery, a cruel psychological experiment conceived by the Medici to control intellectuals and break their will. A killer line was scrawled on the page. The most powerful chains are not made of iron, but of desire. The stakes flipped. The forbidden power was a lie. The whole terrifying ritual was a sham, a tool of humiliation and control. The evidence drop was a quiet bomb, a piece of truth that shattered the dark fantasy. Marco's hands trembled not with fear, but with a cold fury. The man he had admired, the man who had promised him enlightenment, was a monster. He had been a guinea pig. And the cruelest part of all was that he had volunteered for his own debasement. What could a broken mind do with such a devastating truth? Marco confronted Alvis, but the professor's reaction was calm, unconcerned. "For the record," Alvis said, his voice as flat as his ledger, "you failed the test. The ritual was never about power, it was about obedience." The public saw Marco's public breakdown as a result of his obsession, his brilliant mind finally succumbing to the strain of his relentless pursuit of knowledge. He was an object of pity. The scholars of Florence murmured about his tragic end. But the truth was far more horrifying. His mind was shattered not by an ancient text, but by the cruel, calculated psychological torment of a man who used a lie to destroy him. This was the ultimate abuse of power. A man who saw knowledge not as a light, but as a weapon. The story of Marco's tragic fate became a hushed warning among the city's young scholars. In Florence, the most beautiful minds often had the most disturbing ends, a testament to the fact that power, even the power of knowledge, could be a dark and dangerous thing. In Florence, a public banquet is not just a feast. It is a stage where power is displayed and enemies are destroyed. This is the story of a young noble publicly accused of a shocking crime, a lie meticulously constructed to humiliate and break him in front of the city's elite. The grand banquet hall of the Palazzo Pitti pulsed with torchlight and music. The scent of roasted pheasant and fine wine filled the air. But for Niccolo, a young noble known for his fiery spirit, the atmosphere was suffocating. He had been compelled to attend by his family, a non-negotiable command from the powerful patriarch Cosimo de' Medici, who sat at the head table, his gaze a cold, unblinking weight. The room was filled with the city's most influential families, each one a potential enemy, a rival, or a pawn. The problem was not a secret, but a public accusation. Niccolo had been told to expect it, to endure it, to play his part. The humiliation was the point. An ominous question hung in the air. What was a man's honor worth when a powerful family demanded its destruction? He felt a chill, a deep, unsettling coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. The clinking of glasses and the soft music masked a vile intention. This was not a celebration, it was a ritual of public shaming. He was the main event.
Midway through the feast, the room fell silent. Cosimo stood, his voice a low rumble. "We have received troubling news about one among us," he said, gesturing to a nervous-looking clerk.
The clerk, his voice trembling, read from a sealed document, a fabricated account of Niccolò's secret debauchery, a detailed ledger entry of his supposed sins. This was the public reversal. The document was an artful lie, a meticulous record of events that never happened. Niccolò watched in horror as his life was rewritten before his eyes. The data was all wrong, a horrifying invention, but the crowd's reaction was brutal. A collective gasp, then a wave of whispers. "He is a pervert," someone said, their voice just loud enough to be heard. Another, a woman, turned away in disgust. Niccolò's face burned with a terrible, heart-shattering shame. The gallery gasped. This was a brutal form of power. Not physical violence, but the utter destruction of a man's reputation. A blade-clean stat. In the 15th century, a public accusation was a sentence regardless of truth. The document was a weapon. How could he fight a lie that was now a public truth? As the public accusation reached its climax, Niccolò's ally, a young cousin named Giulia, moved through the crowd. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with fear. She approached Niccolò, feigning a moment of comfort, and as she embraced him, she slipped a small object into his hand. It was a single folded note, a protest against the ritualized humiliation. The note was not meant to save him, but to prove the truth. "Cosimo is terrified of you," the note read. "This is the price for your freedom." The words were a killer line, a phrase that revealed the true nature of the event. The public shaming was not a punishment for a crime, but a ritual of dominance, a display of power so absolute it could turn truth into a lie and honor into shame. This was their version of a viral leak, a scandal that would trend in every street corner in the city. A Medici chronicle from the period hints at such public displays, a testament to the family's brutal desire to maintain their authority. Niccolò's legacy was not his rebelliousness, but his broken spirit. What other secrets did the city's private rooms hold? An artist's studio is a sanctuary, a place of creation. But in Florence, a powerful man turned it into a prison. His obsession with a young painter was a disease, and his demands, recorded in silent terror, became a horrifying ritualistic display of power. This is a story of art, obsession, and a truth hidden in plain sight.
The studio of Giulia was a sanctuary, filled with the scent of turpentine and oil paints. She was a beautiful rebel, a young painter whose talent rivaled the master's. But her genius had attracted the wrong kind of attention. Count Vittore, a man of immense wealth and sinister reputation, had become her patron. His patronage was a guise for his dark fixation, a desire to own not just her art, but her. He commissioned a portrait, but his demands were chilling. The portrait was not of him, but of her, in a specific, degrading position. The problem was the canvas itself, a silent witness to her psychological humiliation. She felt a cold dread as she locked the door to the studio. A sense of entrapment, of being alone in a vast, silent palace, pressed down on her. The sounds of the outside world were muffled by the heavy drapes. The laughter and music from the Medici palace, a cruel, distant echo. It was a prison of silence. What did a locked door truly protect? The only sounds in the room were the scrape of Giulia's charcoal and the slow, heavy tick of a clock. The closed-door acoustics of the studio amplified every sound, every painful minute. Vittore would watch her, his gaze an unblinking wait. He would command her, her body, to take a humiliating position, a form of ritualized degradation. He was not interested in her art. He was interested in her submission. His voice, a low and terrible whisper, compelled her to continue to engage in the acts he commanded. The pain and pleasure of this strange dance were intertwined, the pain of her soul's violation masked by the thrill of her defiance. He meticulously documented her every physical and emotional reaction in a small black notebook, a horrifying ledger of his perverse desires. A pattern interrupt. This was no artistic collaboration. It was a methodical process of psychological torture, a man using his power to possess a soul he could never truly own. The entries were chilling. Subject's face revealed a flicker of shame. Success. The artist's studio had become a stage for a silent, horrifying performance. How could she fight a man who owned not just her art, but her silence? In a moment of quiet, defiant rage, Julia created a secret message, a quiet rebellion against her ritualized humiliation. In a small, almost invisible corner of the canvas, she wove a coded message in the background, a series of symbols and an inscription. It was a killer line that exposed him, a silent scream hidden in plain sight. The message was meant for her ally, a rival of the Count. It detailed her psychological torture, the true dark nature of their sessions, and the horrifying truth of his obsession. The evidence drop was an artistic masterpiece, a single protest against a man who had used his power to break her. This was the most effective kind of communication, a message that could not be intercepted, a protest that could not be silenced. The truth was not in a document or a letter. It was in the paint, in the canvas, in the very heart of the art itself. The stakes had flipped. The painting was no longer a symbol of his power, but a testament to his perversion. What happened when the truth of the art was revealed to the world? The completed portrait was unveiled in a public exhibition. The Florentine elite gasped in admiration. They saw a masterwork of light and shadow, a painting of immense beauty and raw emotion. But a powerful Medici rival, a man who suspected the Count's perversion, saw something else. He was the one who found the hidden message. The painting, a public masterpiece, became a private scandal. He leaked the truth in hushed whispers, and the Count's reputation, once so solid, began to crumble. The public reversal was not immediate, but slow and certain. The Count, a man who had commanded silence, was now the subject of public scorn. His obsession was now his downfall. The cover-up was absolute, with the painting eventually taken from public view, but the story had already been told. The lesson of this scandal was brutal but clear. In a city where art was a commodity, the human soul was often the true price. The most beautiful masterpieces could hold the most disturbing secrets.
What dark history was still buried in the Medici archives? A father's duty is to protect his child. But what if a powerful man's greatest fear is his own flesh and blood? This is the story of a patriarch's cold, meticulous plan to erase a beautiful girl's identity. A horrifying cover-up recorded in a secret ledger, and a downfall that came from the very truth he tried to bury.
The summons for Bianca came from her own father. Messer Renzo was a man of immense power, a financier whose connections ran deep into the Medici court. His public life was a tapestry of virtue, but it hid a monstrous secret. Bianca, a beautiful girl of 16, was his illegitimate daughter. Her very existence was a threat, a living testament to a forbidden passion he had long since suppressed. The problem was not a rumor, but a sealed summons from a rival family. The summons for Bianca came from her own father. Messer Renzo was a man of immense power, a financier whose connections ran deep into the Medici court. His public life was a tapestry of virtue, but it hid a monstrous secret. Bianca, a beautiful girl of 16, was his illegitimate daughter. Her very existence was a threat, a living testament to a forbidden passion he had long since suppressed. The problem was not a rumor, but a sealed summons from a rival family.
They had uncovered the truth and demanded she sign a declaration to protect his reputation. The document was a lie, a testament to her non-existence. Bianca was to be compelled to sign it. The air in the study was cold, smelling of old paper and dust. The latch on the door clicked shut with a chilling finality. Renzo's gaze was as cold as a winter stone. The horror was not what he would do, but the quiet, detached way he would do it, as if she were a ledger entry and not his own child.
She was to be a sacrifice. The sound of Renzo's quill was the only sound in the room. He sat at his desk, a private ledger open before him, his face a cold mask of concentration. "We will now begin," he said, his voice flat. He commanded Bianca to read a prepared document, a horrifying lie stating that she was the daughter of a lowly servant, a declaration that would legally erase her true identity and her connection to him. He was a master of psychological manipulation, using his power to compel her, his voice a relentless whisper that broke her will. The pain was in the air, a silent, terrible pressure. This was no simple document. It was a ritual of humiliation, a demand for her soul. The data was all here, being meticulously recorded in the ledger. Each time she flinched, each time her hand trembled, it was noted. Subject hesitated for 2 minutes. Compliance recorded. This was a meticulous record of a man's capacity for cruelty, a chilling chronicle of a father's betrayal. The thud of a stamp marked the end of the entry.
How could a single piece of paper hold so much horror? In a moment of quiet, defiant desperation, Bianca found her chance. As she was being led from the room, she passed a trusted family friend, a man known for his kindness and his quiet rebellion against Renzo's cruelty. As she brushed past him, she slipped a small object into his hand. It was a single, folded note. Not the document she had been forced to sign, but a secret note she had prepared beforehand. It detailed her father's past crimes, his manipulation of her mother, and the horrifying truth about her own identity. It was a killer line that exposed him, a silent scream that could not be silenced. The evidence drop was not proof of her defiance, but of his monstrous lies. The stakes had flipped. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully covered up his past. But a single desperate act had undone his entire plan. The small note, filled with a terrible truth, was a protest against her ritualized humiliation, a protest that would soon be heard by all of Florence.
The rival family received the note. They presented it to the Florentine court, and the public reversal was brutal. Renzo's reputation, built on a lifetime of deceit, crumbled in an instant. The public was horrified by his cruel deception, his willingness to sacrifice his own child to maintain his reputation. The city gasped. The whispers turned into shouts of outrage. His downfall was swift and absolute. The man who had commanded silence was now the subject of public scorn. This was their viral leak, a scandal that would trend in every street corner in the city. Renzo's meticulous cover-up had been undone by a simple, desperate act of defiance. The lesson was brutal, but clear. In Florence, a man's legacy was not built on his power, but on the fragility of his secrets. The most powerful families could be undone by the simple truth. The chilling ledger, the forced signature, the silent terror, it all came to light. a horrifying testament to the depths of human perversion and the enduring power of a single, silent act of defiance. What dark history was still buried in the Medici archives? Power is a performance, but behind the curtains, a darker ritual is practiced. This is the story of a final, horrifying rite of passage into the Medici inner circle, a ritual of obedience that was more terrifying than any public execution. This is the ultimate story of a man's rebellion against a soul-crushing terror. The summons for Giuliano, a young and promising poet, was a great honor. He was to undergo a final rite of passage, a private ceremony to be formally initiated into the Medici inner circle. The event was held in a hidden chamber beneath the palazzo, a place of silent echoes and damp stone. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and the sharp smell of fear. The problem was not the honor, but the chilling ritual that followed. A single torch burned in the center of the room, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. 3 elders of the Medici family stood in a circle, their faces unreadable masks.
1. The powerful Cosimo de' Medici held a sealed scroll. The ritual was a horrifying, methodical procedure, a complete psychological degradation. An ominous question whispered in the silence. What price would a man pay for power? The heavy oak door shut behind Giuliano, the sound of the latch, a final, terrible note. He was trapped. What awaited him was a horror he could never have imagined. Cosimo's voice was a low command. We will now begin the procedure. A second man, an old clerk, unrolled a scroll of parchment. The torchlight stung Giuliano's eyes, making the letters on the page seem to writhe. By instruction of the most honored Cosimo, and for the security of our sacred circle. The ritual was a series of commands designed to completely break Giuliano's will. He was ordered to engage in explicit acts of submission, his body to be an instrument of their power, a ritualistic humiliation that went far beyond mere degradation. The elders' voices, low and relentless, compelled him to continue. The pain and pleasure were intertwined, the psychological pain of his soul's violation masked by the terror of his situation. A pattern interrupt. This was a cold-blooded study of obedience. A blade clean stat. In the 15th century, obedience to a powerful patron was often more important than loyalty to one's own soul. The data was all here, being meticulously recorded on the scroll. Could a man's mind ever truly be broken? The ritual continued for what felt like an eternity. But in a moment of utter despair, Giuliano's eyes fell on a small, loose stone in the wall. Tucked inside was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a note, written in a trembling hand. A single, damning phrase was scrawled on it: "You are not alone." The note was a killer line, an admission of a previous victim's terror. The evidence drop was a quiet protest, a message that Giuliano was a part of a long, horrifying tradition of abuse. The stakes had flipped. He was no longer just a victim, he was a witness. The note was not meant to save him, but to give him the resolve to act. He was not alone in his shame. The terrible knowledge of his ritual was a bond he shared with countless others. He crumpled the paper in his hand, a silent promise to himself that this ritual, this monstrous display of power, would not be unseen. The torchlight flickered, and for a moment Giuliano felt a quiet, defiant fire of his own.
What could a single, broken man do with such a devastating truth? The next day, Giuliano was publicly welcomed into the Medici inner circle. He attended a grand reception, a public performance of his success. The crowd cheered, the gallery gasped in admiration. He was a hero, a favored son of the Medici. But in a powerful public reversal, Giuliano didn't deliver a speech. He simply stood, a small, pained smile on his face, and with a single symbolic gesture, he mimicked one of the humiliating positions from the ritual. The inner circle saw it. Their faces turned to ice. The public, though they did not understand the gesture, saw the terrible look in their eyes. The secret was out. The scandal was not in a document or a leak, but in a single, silent act. The patron's downfall was not immediate, but it was inevitable. The whispers began, and the rumors spread. The ritual, meant to bind him, had become the very weapon he used to destroy his master's reputation. Giuliano's public act was his victory. A man who was broken by a horrifying ritual had found a way to fight back.